So right now we're at, oh, here comes someone else. We're going to give just a minute to let people trickle in and see if we get anybody else.
Sure.
Zach, other than the people we've already discussed, you haven't heard from anyone else, right?
No.
Okay.
Hey, Mark.
Hey there. Good evening.
Thanks for coming. Up here, Shannon.
Zach, do you want to say anything about Rachel when we start to, or no?
Yeah, sure. That's actually a good idea. Hey, Shannon.
Okay.
I see you have a tissue in your hand. Is that not
It's
a good?
a hair tie, but I actually do have tissues in my pocket.
Thick.
So it looks like the county has a whole department for stormwater management, Shannon.
Yeah, right.
Awesome.
As of the 18th. I'm gonna go off camera for just a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, here comes Mr. Trout.
Oh, great.
All right, so we're getting people.
Awesome. Looks like someone's helping him out. Mr. Trout.
There you guys are. I couldn't get hold of you.
Here we are.
It's out of my pay grade, above my pay grade. Zach, let's hit it, buddy. What are we going to do?
Oh, it's an important meeting. This one, the next one.
Yeah, I know. I just like to know if one of the girls there in the state of Maryland could tell me how many millions of gallons of raw sewage runoff into the streams, rivers, bay, etc., from the watershed, the Chesapeake Bay watershed, each year from public and private. Do they have what those numbers are?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I've been, I'm in the seafood business, so the bay is very important to me.
Oh yeah.
And
Right,
I'm
we don't
reading
call them girls
everything
anymore.
all the time. They just had a blowout in a town. They lost several million gallons of raw sewage.
Yep.
And I've just thought to myself, I mean, how many million, because I know how many gallons we lose up here in Frederick County. You read it in the paper.
What happens to
Over the
us,
course
too?
of a year, it's probably close to a minimum of 1 million. So I'm just wondering, in our Chesapeake Bay watershed, I mean, raw sewage is about the worst thing that can go into any water site. How
You're right
many
about
millions
that.
of gallons we actually lose a year through a public and private sector?
It's probably significant.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody adds that number up baywide or not.
I try to find it a couple times on all the sites. I can't seem to find a number.
Yeah,
When it really base you how many millions of gallons drop.
I know we're required to report that to the EPA,
Yep.
but it's all estimations, though.
Yep.
I mean, there's no way
Yeah.
possible.
Idea how much sewage goes through your line every minute, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah.
Fine, you gotta take the minutes and figure that's how many gallons.
Right.
All right.
Well, it's also a matter of how many of those events you have in a given year due to rainfall.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, I read in
It's
the Bay,
ridiculous. Yep.
small little Bay Journal paper that I subscribe to and donate to every year.
Me
But
too.
the Bay's a lot better now than it was 20 years ago. We got nothing out of the Bay 20 years ago, hardly. It is working. I don't know, I think we need to, I hate to, I wasn't there last month, but I just feel the infrastructure needs more work than these little programs like the MS4 little program, streets. I think more money needs to go to water and sewer management infrastructure than it is to go to these little programs. I think that's your biggest culprit. No, I'm just saying, what do I know? I'm a seafood guy.
Well,
Yeah.
Mr. Trout, I don't think you're alone in that position. And I think one of the factors that just sort of dictates that more money goes to those things is because they are significantly more expensive to address And you're not wrong. That is where
Yeah,
you
that's what-
you have the
I-
potential to get great bang for the buck making those investments. Unfortunately, there's a lot of infrastructure money coming down the pike. So hopefully that will begin to address some of that.
I hope it trickles down to the small towns and just not Baltimore and other big towns in Maryland.
Exactly.
You know, Baltimore
Right.
gets money every year for everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
People don't realize how much money federal and state that Baltimore gets.
Oh, I do. I see the grants. Yeah.
That revolution is like Ronnie Reagan says. If you had to go to the bank to get your paycheck and you start at window number 1 and get your gross pay, and then you get down to window number 10 after they took out your gas tax and everything else that you pay regular, you'd have a revolution. People don't realize how that tax gets into them. Nobody realized they pay like 58 cents a gallon on their gas tax.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started, Mr. Trout.
Hey guys, I don't mean to interrupt, Zach. I know you this football game tonight, Zach.
Nope.
All
Nope.
good.
You're right all the time.
Thanks.
You're very valid.
Let's hit it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Your floor, Zach. Run with it.
Okay, so I'd first like to say, thank you all for attending. This is our 3rd out of 4 meetings. I would like to announce that Rachel Esses had to resign from the board because she moved out of the town boundary. So she's no longer a citizen representative. So we'll be moving forward without Rachel, but we want to thank her for her dedication to the board. So I'd like to now turn it over to Jen and Michelle and Natalia.
All right. Can everybody see? Oh, geez. Everybody see my flipping slides?
I can see your agenda. Is that what
Yeah,
you're talking
okay.
about?
So we're in the presentation.
Yep. Looks good,
Um,
Michelle.
All right, thanks. So our agenda for this evening, do a quick recap from the last meeting, a little bit of an update on the level of service analysis. We are going to talk about fee structures this evening. That's the bulk of our conversation. And I suspect that we will have a lively conversation around that this evening. Our next meeting is on February 17th at 7 o'clock. And that will be our last meeting where we present our recommendations. So our last meeting, we talked about the level of service analysis, basically what is Emmitsburg currently doing and at what cost, and is there anything that is missing? And as with the first meeting, we generated the 2-pager that Zach distributed at all the usual haunts. So if you need to see that and haven't seen that, just let him know and he can get it to you. We talked about potential financing options that included cost reducing mechanisms such as asset management, dig once, and collaboration. We talked a lot about different funding streams, including grants and fee systems. And then we talked about how you can engage private landowners through outreach incentives to help with your costs and your project as well. So tonight we're going to talk about stormwater utility fees. Big topic. There's a lot to digest. So I want to give some background information about fees, some different types of structures we're going to go through, and we'll give some off the cuff initial recommendations for what we think might make sense for you, but we really want to hear from you this evening. So to start with, the stormwater utility fees, also sometimes just called stormwater utilities, they are not mandated by the states. These are something.
Excuse me.
Huh?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They're not mandated by the states. They're just something that places are doing to help raise money for all of their stormwater information. A lot of what's on these first couple slides comes from Western Kentucky University Stormwater Utility Survey. That survey is a combination of, they send the survey out to a whole bunch of different people, just asking people to reply. And then they do a lot of internet research as well to compile basically a rough idea of what's happening with stormwater utilities across the country. So based off of the most recent survey, We know that there are 1,851 stormwater utilities nationwide that were identified through this survey. They think the number is probably slightly higher than that, but we're going with 1,851, including 17 in the state of Maryland. They also have them in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and DC. Virginia has 30, Pennsylvania has 58, and FYI, Pennsylvania has been adding stormwater utilities at a very rapid rate, like faster than a lot of other states. The district has one because it's all one place, and West Virginia also has 10. So nationwide, the average residential fee for a single family home per month is $5.94. And the median fee that they identified was $4.88. There's a lot of flux there. A lot of that also depends on how you bill and when you bill, which are things we'll talk about a little bit further in the presentation. And also, we're not the only people to have them. They have them in Canada, Australia, France, Germany, and several other places abroad have stormwater fees as well.
Anything in Russia? China?
I'm not sure if they have them in Russia or not.
Yeah,
The map that you see,
other high marks, something like this.
the map that you see here, each one of those little green dots represents a stormwater utility fee that was identified through this survey. So as you can see, they are all over the place. They're not just in the progressive states, they're in some very conservative states as well. And so their data really shows the implementation of these fees is not governed by politics or by size. The largest place that they identified with a fee is Los Angeles, which has a population of around 4 million. The smallest place that has a fee is a town in Florida that has a population of 88 people. Washington, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, all of which tend to lean very Democratic, have over 100 stormwater fees in the state. And Texas, Ohio, Iowa, and Florida, which tend to be more on the conservative side, also have under 100 stormwater utilities. So they span the gamut. The map that you see on this slide shows you the same distribution as the last slide, only this represents the size of the fee. So the fees range from 0, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, to $45 a month. And this is largely dictated by the stormwater needs of those communities. To date, there are 7 states with over 100 utilities in them, and Indiana is very close with 99. So point being, they're ubiquitous across the country. It's not Democrat or Republican, rich or poor, big or small, they are everywhere. This table shows you all of the fees in the state of Maryland. So as I said, there's 17 of them. They're listed here in alphabetical order. So the first column is the community, whether it's a county or a town or a city. The second column represents the fee type. In this column, the letter T represents a tiered system, which we're going to talk about these fee types in a little bit. The letter E represents an ERU, which is an equivalent residential unit. D represents something that they call 2-level, meaning there's one level for residential and a different level for commercial. The F represents flat fee or fixed rate, meaning everybody pays the same fee regardless of the size or type of your property or the amount of impervious surface that you have. And IA represents a fee that is strictly based off of the impervious area that there is. The third column, ERU, that is the equivalent residential unit, which we will explain. That's in square feet. The fee, this column is a little hard to interpret straight across the board because, again, this number comes down to the type of fee you have and when you bill and how it's broken up, right? So I can't say that these are all monthly or all quarterly because people don't all bill the same ways. But for example, I can tell you Berlin, $4.16, that is what their monthly stormwater fee is for any residential property. Then you see the year that the fee was implemented, and then the population of the community. For point of reference, Emmitsburg, your population is right around 3,100, right? So you would be on the smaller side of this list, but certainly not the smallest that we've seen anywhere that's way more than 88 people in Florida. So I just wanted to give you sort of an idea of, in Maryland, where they are, the size of the places that have them, the ranges of the fees, and then how they're broken down by type. So you can see in this table that the most popular is the ERU. An important point is that most, but not all types of fee structures can be implemented fairly. We're going to talk about 3 specific types this evening that are sort of the most common. There's also no saying that you would have to create your fee based off of any existing structure, but it's sort of one of those why reinvent the wheel if other people have already devised methods that work. One of the types we will talk about this evening cannot be structured in a fair way due to the nature of it. Most fees are based on the total amount of impervious cover on the property. That's a starting point for almost everything. And then you can take that in whatever direction you want. When we talk about impervious cover on a property, we are including your roof, your driveway, your patio, your parking lot. What is typically not included in the impervious cover calculation are things like public sidewalks, public roadways, and structures that are in public right-of-way. And the general idea is the larger your impervious surface, the more hard surfaces, more concrete you have, the more runoff you are producing, ergo, the larger your fee is going to be. And the most common structure for fees is the equivalent residential unit, the ERU. Next in line are tiered systems and then flat fees. Those are the 3 we're going to talk about tonight. For the Western Kentucky study, there were 895 ERU systems that were identified, 254 tiered systems, and then 230 flat rate systems. So ERU is by far the most popular. So what is the ERU system? This is based on the average impervious area on a single family residential parcel. So the ERU is equal to the total impervious area for residential properties. You take that number, you divide it by the total number of properties that you looked at, and that gives you your ERU. You can do this a couple different ways. You can do it with GIS and be really thorough about it. There are places who take a randomized subset of the properties to develop their numbers off of. You can get to the total impervious area in any number of ways. The trick then is to find a balance between how much money you need to bring in for your stormwater expenses and the number of ERUs that you have to determine what your fee should be. So the example on this slide is from Gettysburg. In Gettysburg, they calculated their total residential lot impervious area to be 2,888,652 square feet. They then divided that number by the total number of residential units within the town, which is 1,144, which gives them 2,518. So Gettysburg has said 1 ERU for us is equal to 2,500 square feet, meaning the average single family home in Gettysburg has 2,500 square feet of impervious area. Does that make sense? All right.
Could I ask a question real quick?
Yep.
And maybe you'll get to this. Oh, maybe you're getting to it now. Never mind. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Let me know if I don't get there. Gettysburg doesn't use a strict ERU system. They actually have a tiered system. And so a tiered system can be constructed in a fair way, but by their nature, they inherently are not. So you have to work to make it fair. In a tiered system, the result is that you get is oftentimes small businesses and homes are being overcharged and the large landowners are paying too little. And so in this case, the fee is based on where your impervious area falls in a series of ranges. So in other words, we know that this is our average, and then you break it up into sections. And if you are this to this, you pay this. If you are this to this amount of impervious area, you pay this, and so on and so forth. And how you determine what those ranges are determines whether or not your tiered system is going to be fair or inherently not fair. In Gettysburg, as I said, 1 ERU is equal to 2,500 square feet of impervious surface. And they determined based off of how many ERUs they had and how much money they needed to raise and whatever else they decided to factor into the scenario, that at 1 ERU was going to essentially cost you $100. So
Is that per year?
Hmm?
Is that per year in Gettysburg, $100 per year for 1 ERUs?
Yes.
So
So
that's per year.
yes. So in Gettysburg, they view all properties the same way. They don't differentiate between whether it's residential or commercial. Their whole system is based off of these 3 tiers. So tier 1 properties, they looked at their average is 2,500 square feet, right? And so then they have half of that. They said if you are less than half of 1 ERU, so 1,250 square feet or less, you are classified as 1/2 of an ERU and your fee is $50. If your property is between 1,250 square feet of impervious area and 3,750 square feet, you pay the full 1 ERU. If you have a significant sized lot with a lot of impervious area on it, more than 3,750 square feet, you fall into tier 3. For tier 3, it is not a flat rate. For tier 3, you take the total amount of your impervious area, you divide it by 2,500 square feet, which is 1 ERU, you round that to the nearest whole number, and then you multiply that by $100, which is what your 1 ERU costs, right? So if you are a large property owner, you are paying more based off of the size of your property. Does that make sense? Zach, I know you feel the pain of the Gettysburg ERU system.
Yep, I'm very familiar with it.
All right, questions about a tiered system. So important point, even the tiered system starts with an ERU. They calculated an ERU to start with, and then they decided to turn it into tiers. The last thing we want to talk about are flat fee systems. In a flat fee system, everybody pays the same rate. It doesn't matter how much impervious area you have. It doesn't matter if you are commercial or residential or a church or whatever. You could have 5,000 square feet of impervious surface. You could have 100,000 square feet. You could have 10 square feet. Everybody pays the same thing. This system cannot be structured fairly, no matter what you do, because you're not taking into account the amount of impervious surface on the parcel. You're just saying, basically, we need to raise money, so everybody's going to pay this fee. So in this scenario, your big box store pays the same fee as a single family home, which is, I'm sure we all can realize that is not inherently fair. There are places where flat fee systems have been implemented temporarily in order to raise some money to complete a study to determine what would be the best or fairest system for that jurisdiction. So in this case, they're saying we are 100% decided we need to implement a fee. We don't know what exactly the best way to do that is. So we want to do a study. So in the interim, we're going to charge everybody a little bit of money to raise some money to figure out what makes the most sense for us in the long run. All right. So this slide overviews 3 different fee systems that we looked at. We looked at the city of Frederick. We looked at Gettysburg. Obviously, you've been using that as an example. And then we looked at Berlin, Maryland. What you see on here is the type of structure, what their ERU or their equivalent terminology is, the rate, the billing structure, the exemptions, and the credit system. So if we look at the first row, the structure, City of Frederick uses something that they call a percent impervious factor, which is their version of an ERU, basically. Gettysburg has a tiered system. Berlin uses a flat fee for residential and an impervious area ERU for the non-residential. In the City of Frederick, what they have done is said, we are assuming on average, a single family home has 30% impervious cover. So rather than going through all the steps in the math to figure out what the actual average is, they're using a percentage. They have decided that in townhomes and anything that's in the downtown district, it's a 55% impervious cover. Gettysburg, we talked about, when our ERU is 2,500 square feet. In Berlin, they went through the same process as Gettysburg, and they determined that one ERU was 2,100 average square feet. When you look at the rate, the City of Frederick charges $21.97 basically per 1,000 square feet of impervious area. We went through the Gettysburg example. Berlin, they charge a flat fee of $50 per year for single family and townhomes, which works out to be that $4.16 per month. And then if you are non-residential, they charge you $25 for whatever your ERU is. So the way that this works, not to get too bogged down in the math, is, but if you look at the City of Frederick, they take the percent impervious factor, so the 30 or the 55%, they multiply that by your lot area, not the impervious area of your lot, your total lot area. And then they multiply that by the unit rate, $21.97, and divide that by 1,000. If you're a commercial property, they take your impervious area, they multiply that by the unit rate, and then they divide it by 1,000. Gettysburg, we already talked about, and Berlin, flat fee for residential. And then if you are a commercial property in Berlin, they take the total impervious area that you have, divide it by their ERU of 2,100 square feet, and then you multiply that number by $25. And that's how they come up with what your fee is. So again, all kind of rooted in the same initial knowledge, but how you determine what your fee is going to be is dependent. And with Gettysburg, I also want to point out that with tier 2, that is where the vast majority of their properties fall, is into that tier 2 category. In terms of billing structure, again, you have a million different ways you can bill. In the City of Frederick, it's the stormwater fee is included as a line item on the water and sewer bill, and it comes out quarterly. In Gettysburg, Gettysburg was interesting to me. So apparently they send out a bill on July 1 that says what your fee for the whole year is. It's kind of like car insurance, right? Here's your fee for the whole year. And then if you pay it in full, you get a 2% discount, or you can opt to pay it quarterly at the full rate. But those bills come completely separate. They're not attached as a line item in any of your other bills. I would be really curious to hear how that works out for Gettysburg, because other places I know where their fees are just like random bills that go out, they don't have a whole lot of luck collecting money. And then in Berlin, it's a line item on the monthly utility bill. So that's where you're paying your fee.
Sorry about that. I was going to say, yeah, Gettysburg has a tough time collecting some bills because, you know, it is a separate from their water and sewer.
Yeah,
but
so there's no teeth in it, right? Like if it's a line item on your water and sewer bill and you don't pay it, you can shut the water off because you're not paying your whole bill. But if it's on its own, you don't have the City of Richmond initially started that way and then opted to change it because we can't get the money. Another important thing to think about is exemptions, meaning, does everybody pay the stormwater fee, or are there property types that we are going to make exempt? Places that are sometimes considered for exemption are houses of worship, sometimes nonprofits, sometimes schools, hospitals, sometimes town property. In these three cases, there are no exemptions. Anyone who is connected to the stormwater system, who is contributing to the stormwater issue is paying, with the exception of like those things we initially talked about, right? Like things in public right of way or public sidewalks, state highway, things like that. Another thing to think about is whether or not you want to have some sort of credit system, meaning is there a way that you can do green infrastructure projects to get money taken off of your stormwater fee? Some places offer those on residential. It's a lot of work and really hard to keep up with. More commonly, you see them only for commercial properties, and that's also because you get the most bang for your buck with green infrastructure on commercial properties because they can be so much bigger. So in the city of Frederick, it's only available to commercial. How much money you can get in credit depends on a whole lot of things, including when the practice was put in the ground, whether it's new construction, whether it's revisions to existing practices, what level of standards the practices need. So it's all over the place, and it's, in my opinion, very complicated. In Gettysburg, they will give a credit to any property that's a half of an ERU or larger. So residential could qualify, and you can get up to 20% of your total fee back. And then in Berlin, it's only available to commercial properties and NGO properties. And again, you can get up to 20% of your total fee. And the important thing about a credit system is, yes, it's a great way to get some people some money back for doing good things. But the other side of that coin is it takes a lot of time and energy to track all of that stuff and inspect them and all of those things. The last row on here, I wanted to give you sort of a real world example for what these fees would look like if you implemented one of these structures as is in Emmitsburg. And so, Mr. Trout, this is your property that we used for this example. So if you were to implement the City of Frederick system in Emmitsburg, Mr. Trout's Jubilee store has 54,450 square feet of impervious area on it. So the yearly fee under their system would be just shy of $1,200. The maximum amount of credit that he could get back would be just over $700. However, I want to caveat that by saying, I think that number is probably a bit too high because I'm guessing that your building would not fall in their highest tier of credit based off of age of building, age of property, things like that. If you were to implement Gettysburg's system, the yearly fee for Jubilee would be $2,200. If that was paid in full, you'd get the 2% discount, so $2,156, and the maximum credit that could come back would be $440. And then in Berlin, the yearly fee would be $650, and the maximum credit that could come back would be $130. And so I wanted to put this information out there so you could see a real world example of how much variety you can get in what you're charging people based off of how you structure your fees.
Hey, Michelle, are you going to talk about exemptions a little bit later?
In what sense?
I just thought, I think it makes a whole lot of sense not to have an exemption. Do you want to expand on that? I think we talked about that.
Yeah, that's on the next slide. I think Jen's going to get into that on the next slide.
Perfect.
Any questions about the 3 fee types we presented or any of this information? I know it's hard to work your mind around the math without actually seeing the math.
This is Shannon. I just have one comment about the flat fee. You said that it can't be fair. It depends on whether you're assessing a fee based on impervious surface and the contribution to the water quality problem, or if you're basing it on the contribution to the solution in terms of all water quality, like corrections within your jurisdiction. So fairness becomes an issue if you're looking at impervious surface as the basis for your fee, but not if you're looking at water quality improvement. And that makes a difference too when you're looking at different fee generating mechanisms that are allowable in legislation.
True. We took the angle of looking at everything from the impervious surface.
Right, I'm just saying
perspective.
that because there's other legal angles that you could take, and it would affect the choice of the fee generating legislation that you use as enabling legislation.
Good point. Other questions, comments? All right. So then Jen, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Sure. I mean, thanks, Michelle, for walking us through all of that. I think it's helpful to see real world examples of what other communities are doing and what that might look like if it were applied to Emmitsburg. I mean, I think I would start off by saying that, you know, these are all of these fee systems are really, if you're going to do it right, and if that's the direction that the town chooses to go, that's up to the town. But if that's the direction the town chooses to go, you know, you really want to tailor it to the situation of the town. And so each of these are unique in that they're rooted in local context. I think, you know, our suggestions would be if the town decides to go down this route, that it seems pretty apparent that a fee to cover at least part of the predicted costs, whether you choose to do that for the whole stormwater program or just for one part of the program, perhaps the TMDL part of the program, the impervious surface requirements, you know, it's going to reduce the burden to the general fund. The town has been incredibly adept at getting grant money to do some of the projects that need to be done. And we certainly applaud that and say you should 100% continue to do that. But even with that grant funding coming in, if there were a fee system, it would definitely reduce burden to the general fund. I think for some of the reasons that Michelle already highlighted, we think an ERU-based system is really that's rooted in impervious surface keeps it more manageable administratively. It keeps it transparent about how and why people are being charged, the rates that they're being charged. It ties the level of the fee to the level of impervious surface and potentially the contribution to the challenges that are being faced. And we suggest, you know, for all of the reasons that the city of Frederick chose to go the route they chose to go, you know, we think keeping it simple is really better for administration and transparency. We think the fee, this comes to the exemption question, Zach, you know, we think the fee should be applied to all properties, regardless of use. And we think, you know, that's sort of EFC's standard line. Every parcel to some extent is contributing to the challenge. And there's a way to structure a fee system so that even if there are parcels, even if you have agricultural parcels with very little impervious surface, there are ways to structure the fee system so that they are not being, you know, overly burdened. We feel like all properties should be included. Everyone's contributing to the challenge, so everyone should be contributing to the solution. We also think that I know there were some questions or some concerns raised in a previous conversation about the fact that the water and sewer fees are being re-examined or are due to be re-examined. And it seemed like, you know, a stormwater fee would just be an additional burden. And while, yes, a stormwater fee at any particular point would be an additional burden to parcel owners, there's efficiencies to be gained of looking at all of those things at the same time and making sure that you're making those decisions considering the other fees that are burdening your residents and your commercial. And so that doing all of that at the same time actually becomes more efficient and more transparent. We think that there's a lot of credit systems are very popular, but they can also be, particularly on the residential side, can be incredibly administratively burdensome in terms of the kind of verification and time spent in administration of those programs. As you saw from some of the examples, other communities are doing like a full payment discount instead because it's less administratively challenging, or they're just focusing on commercial properties where putting green infrastructure in place is bigger bang for the buck in terms of the administrative challenge or burden. or other communities have decided to, put a fee in place and then do the credit system, phase that in over time. So there's a couple different ways. And then a bullet point that I didn't think to include on this slide that I should mention. We think if a fee system is the route that Emmitsburg chooses to go, that billing should be tied to the existing water and sewer fee system. It reduces the administrative burden, and it gives you that opportunity to leverage water and sewer systems for non-payers. So if you have to get it, unfortunately, into a collections situation with someone, you can leverage water and sewer service to be able to collect those fees. So, I know fees are not popular. It's never an exciting or popular conversation to have to suggest another fee. So, we understand that, we recognize that there are pros and cons to every potential solution to the financial, the financial challenges that managing stormwater presents. So I guess at this point, we would really value hearing your thoughts on, I know you're still digesting what we've shared, but hearing your thoughts on some of these ideas and where you think the town should be going in terms of being able to sustainably support their stormwater needs.
Yeah, and Jen, I want to echo what you said, and I really want to kind of get down to the nitty gritty on this, because I don't want you all to spend a lot of time on things that the committee is not interested in pursuing. For example, if they're dead set against a flat fee, there's no point of you guys spending a lot of time the next month really digesting into that. So I'd love to hear from everybody, just so we can be more efficient and effective for our next meeting and to the board.
And one other thought, I just want to say, yes, Zach, what you said, we'll certainly take any comments and feedback from tonight into our final recommendations. But then also this bullet here about who the fee should apply to, I just wanted to say that that language, the term real property, that's the terminology that's used in the city of Frederick's fee as well as Berlin's. And then that statement about all properties that use, are served by, or benefited by stormwater management system, that's the language directly out of Gettysburg's stormwater fee. So that's how they're identifying who the fee applies to.
Michelle, can you turn back to the slide where there's 3 different municipalities?
That one?
Yes, just so people can see, the differences and everything. So I'd like to open the floor up now. If Michelle, you good?
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
So I'll start off and throw some things out. I know nobody likes paying fees, but I think we should have a fee, even if it doesn't cover all of the costs. I think at least a fee to cover whatever percentage we arrive at. It helps have residents get some buy-in to the situation and brings it real to them that there is a problem that we have to deal with. And I think that's always helpful. And I do think it should be billed quarterly with our utility bill. I kind of like the tiered system that Gettysburg is using. But like I said just a second ago, I wouldn't bill it one time a year like they do, but I do it quarterly. But I do like the tiered system. It seems to me a little more fair. And I suppose I would be in favor of a credit system for commercial properties. I don't want to make it too complicated, but especially for the larger commercial properties, there may be some benefit if they could do some things to, soften up their landscape and not have as much impervious service. So that's my initial thought anyway.
Mark, it's funny you say that. I agree 100% with you. That's exactly what my recommendation is, staff level. And for the exemptions, I agree with the University of Maryland. I don't think we should have exemptions. It's basically, it's not fair to the residents that pay, taxes and everything else. So,
Right.
A couple questions. Is everybody in Emmitsburg on water and sewer?
yes.
Okay, well, that's great. That makes it easier. And the enabling legislation for Frederick City and Berlin, do you know what that is? Like, is there a state enabling legislation that they built their local ordinance on?
I know when we worked with Berlin, they adapted from the state enabling legislation.
For the stormwater remediation fee?
Correct.
There's a bunch of different legislations you can use. There's some on drainage districts. The one that we were looking at most recently that I would recommend you looking at is the resilience legislation that passed recently, because you can put a fee on it and it's the most flexible one that's out there. Plus you can use it for other stuff later if you want. And then as far as exemptions go, I agree that you don't want to create categorical exemptions. You can also get legal challenges on that you don't want, because once you start allowing some people to not pay, then other people can argue that they don't have to pay. But I would consider a hardship exemption. You may have hardship exemptions in some of your other payment programs. You might even have it for water and sewer fees. So what I would suggest you look at applying whatever existing hardship exemptions you have for that program onto this as well.
Can you elaborate on that? I don't think we have anything on our water and sewer system.
Okay, some do, some don't. So, if you've got people in your community that are struggling to pay bills, just period, like say elderly people that are on fixed incomes, sometimes the jurisdiction has a way of helping those people out by either having an income adjustment on their bills or by exempting them to certain kinds of bills. I know some of the state required funds, like I think the flush tax might have a hardship exemption on it, Bay Restoration Fund.
Mhm.
So a lot of those people are already not having to pay certain kinds of fees as a result of that. You might even be able to get records from the county on who's exempt from paying the BRF, for example, to apply to whatever fee you decide to do here.
Okay.
You might be able to get it on a yearly basis from the Treasury. But I would consider looking into that, especially if some of these fees end up getting a little bit high for people and they may have land, but they may not have incomes. So having that is a good idea. And then your ERU basis, you can do it based on impervious area, but you can also do it based on the square footage of your improvements. And when you do it on an actual impervious area, there's a plus and a minus to it, right? Because it's a more direct nexus to, like, if your fee is based on impervious surface, then it's a more direct nexus to that. But it's more work to calculate it, and you're going to get more challenges on it because people are going to say, well, that's not impervious. That's actually a gravel driveway and it's pervious, or it's a porous paver, or I've treated that with this thing, which is actually stormwater, which you don't have a record of, but it actually is stormwater, and therefore I shouldn't have to pay for the imperviousness on this part of my lot. And you're going to have to deal with those kinds of challenges and people asking you to reduce their fee. If you do it based on square footage, then you can get it straight out of property records, and it should be a fairly straight calculation and won't have to take you as much time to do. The downside is it's not as accurate. So you probably want to weigh those two things. And if you don't have some way of people reducing their fee, then you probably don't have to, because it's only the counties that have to do that through the enabling legislation that the state passed for stormwater remediation fees. But if you use like resilience legislation, there's no requirements in there for having to do that. So those are just some thoughts that I had from our own research that we did into these different fee structures.
Thank you, Shannon.
Zach,
Hey,
can you hear me?
yes.
Hey, we're talking about two items here. You got water and sewer infrastructure in Emmitsburg, and you're talking about raising the rates on the water and sewer systems to handle the infrastructure improvements that are needed to get us back up to snuff. And then we're hitting their community with this other tax, which I call rain tax. So I think what you need to do, you need to find out where you're going to go with the water and sewer, and then decide how you're going to tier this MS4 situation. I mean, it might be hard for the community to swallow two nuts at one time.
Well, I will tell you, and TJ and Frank could probably tell you as well, we believe our sewer rates are going to decrease and our water rates are going to increase, and they should level out pretty close. And I know the taxes were recently decreased. So, we don't think it's going to be that hard of a hit on anybody. Obviously,
Right.
even $1 is a hard hit on some people, but we think everything's going to equal itself out at the end of the day, especially with that tax decrease that we had last year.
Right. That's things you gotta look at,
Exactly.
You don't want to hit somebody with a baseball bat. You better off go with a feather and work your way up.
Exactly. Yep.
And I agree with the tier system. You just gotta decide how you want to set it up. You know what I mean?
Steve, what are your thoughts about exemptions in the credit system?
I don't believe in the credit system unless you're gonna do massive improvements that's gonna change the effects of the water, like me putting a roof garden over my whole store. Well, then, that should be credit to me.
Right.
You see, over so many years, say over 10 years, each year I get a credit towards that for instigating, starting that program, that the water that hits my flat roof goes into like a rain garden and comes out clean. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's what I think Mark was agreeing with. And I also agree with, for commercial properties only,
Yes.
would get the credit system. And in commercial, I believe we would also include, the Daughters of Charity, obviously, because they're huge green advocates. And this is something they may be willing to do. I'll let George talk more about that, but I want to make sure they're included as well, in the system. So basically, non-residential would probably be a better term than commercial.
Yeah.
Right. That would cover
So-
the whole gamut. Yes.
Right.
So Steve, I really think you should put a garden on your roof. I think that's a great
Yeah, I'm
idea.
thinking about that. I think about putting a mud roof down here at my house.
I would come in toward that. Mr. Trout, what's your feeling on exemptions?
Well, that's something you have to look at. I don't know. We have a lot of nonprofits in Emmitsburg. You have a situation here. I believe everybody should be included in this at the same time. I mean, how much are they helping the community in other ways? You know what I mean? That's something you have to look at. Zach's brought that to my attention before we had the first meeting, that a lot of the nonprofits in the town are not paying any money towards any of the infrastructure of the town.
Right.
So maybe this is something where they can help out a little bit with the infrastructure. I don't know. That's something that has to be decided by the elected officials.
Yeah. And one of my concerns about exempting, any kind of organization is
Yeah, I
lot
was
of
getting ready to go nonprofit after this meeting.
a lot of the nonprofits are heavy hitters. They have the biggest
Yeah, yes.
the biggest
I agree
parking
with you.
lots, and a lot of churches are old, and obviously they have large parking lots without stormwater management facilities. And I'm not trying to single out churches, but
But it's tough. The churches are having a hard time getting, patrons to come to church anymore. So yeah, it's a tough cookie to play with.
it is.
Yeah.
Maybe you could set up a situation that nonprofits pay a flat fee. I'm not sure how you're going to do it.
One of the
But-
things that Prince George's has done to address that, Prince George's County has done to address that challenge, is they do have in their credit system for non-residential, they do have an opportunity for faith-based organizations and nonprofits to be part of their outreach and communications. And so they don't get the same full credit that someone who put a best management practice, a rain garden or a green roof in, but
Right.
it does give them a little bit of a break for being part of the communications and education and outreach component.
Smart.
And they've
That's
given
why-
that a
This is
special
Pastor
name. They call it their alternative compliance program, is how they refer to that.
It's also a big difference between a tax and the fee. And a reason to go to a fee structure is because you have less exemptions in the fee, because nonprofits are categorically exempt in a tax, whereas if you use a fee, you can do some judicious things with it.
Right.
And if you're having to do retrofits on public property or private property in order to meet your MS4 requirements, you can also target nonprofits if they have aging infrastructure.
Good point.
Hey, Zach, it's TJ.
Hey.
So as one of the two guys on this call, that's going to get yelled at when this all comes to fruition, because as obviously as Mr. Trout said, the elected officials,
Right.
this, I think there's a lot that needs to be considered when long term when it comes to this, because obviously as someone stated, hey, we got to figure out the water. How are we gonna change the water and sewer bill? And like you said, hit them with a feather before you hit them with a baseball bat. If we go in and drop this right now, people are going to lose their minds, and then we're going to change the water and sewer shortly thereafter. And then what kind of fight are we going to get in with that as well? I personally like the tier system myself. I'm not a big fan of the exemptions personally, and this is no offense to anybody, the nonprofits and things of that nature, but we do have a lot of them here in town, and a lot of those residents also reside outside of town, not in town, that are running some of those nonprofits. So, what are we setting ourselves up for, where we're saying, oh yeah, don't worry about them, we'll put it on everybody else, even though some of those people use those facilities and things of that nature. So it's a double-edged sword right now in trying to implement all of these things until we have some of that water and sewer knowledge and how we're going to change that going forward. I fully expect to see Jubilee with trees in every other parking spot, to kind of get some of those exemptions, Mr. Trout. I think it would be beautiful for that parking lot, all joking aside. But it's one of those situations where Commissioner Davis and I are going to get our heads chewed off possibly at one point in time, depending on how we decide to structure this. So I think being fully transparent as possible, and the tiered system, I think, structures it a lot better, where people can say, okay, hey, this is how much, this is where it is. And doing it on a quarterly water bill allows us to collect it versus, like you said, in Gettysburg, that one-time collection on July 1st, dude, everybody's going to throw that bill away and never see it again. And we're going to be sitting there scratching going, well, why don't we have any of this money? It's because everybody threw that bill away and we have no way to enforce it. So, you look at it, you look at some of those things where it's $50 a year. If $4 is added to your water bill, yeah, you're going to notice it, but it's not going to be, or I'm sorry, $12 is added to your water bill. It's not going to be as big of a hit as per se, like the one-time payment and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point, TJ, about transparency. Staff, we've really been hitting people hard in the newsletters. We even mentioned the terms possibly charging a utility fee. I was joking with the University of Maryland folks before the meeting. We even put it in our elevator in the town office. We put it around town. We've done everything we can, and I have not received one question from residents. So I hope
people aren't going to question it.
People don't react until they see it in their head. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll exactly what Steve just said. Everybody's not going to pay attention until they pick up that first bill and they go, yo, what is that?
What's up?
Right.
Some people are diligent. They look at their bill thoroughly and they're like, okay, this is what this is. This is what this is. This is what this is. Other people just pick it up and see a flat number. And I think this goes back to some of the problems we had in the last 2 years. We're like, oh, I'm paying $350 for my water. And you're like, actually, you're only paying $100 for your water. It's the trash, the sewer, everything else that's put in there. So that's when we can I could stand in every meeting for the next 6 months till I'm blue in the face screaming, hey, we're going to do this. Hey, we're going to do this. And no one's going to pay attention until they pick up that first bill and they go, yo, what is this?
Correct.
So, I mean, yes, the whole idea behind educating and stuff like that, I think we're trying to get ahead of it and we're trying to do the good job. But at the end of the day, we're not going to hear how everybody feels about it until it slaps them in the face, and then we get slapped right back.
Correct.
Yeah, this is Pastor John. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so, yeah. Representing a nonprofit, one of them in town, with one of the larger parking lots in town. Well, of course, everybody uses our lot, including our members, but probably more people on the outside of our congregation in these days that we're in. And to some degree, that's a nice thing that we are able to accommodate some parking, though it's always a constant source of tension for our parishioners who are elderly and not real great shape. So it's a whole nother issue, but I'm just saying, since the parking lot is what we're talking about, as well as the building and the runoff and all that. But I can see that we should be part of the fee structures, but I mean, I want to know, what is the fee structure that you're projecting at this time? Is it what is the goal? I'm probably, maybe you talked about this last time, or maybe we're not there yet and don't know how much is really required for all this.
Yeah,
Do we know, are we be close to the city of Frederick? I guess they're really all not that far apart, really.
yeah.
Are we looking at numbers in these ranges?
Thank you, John. Yeah, so we have not spoke about that yet. The next meeting, I think they're gonna get into pretty much precise number. So I don't want everybody to freak out right now. We've had very, very, minimal conversations with Jen and her team. And Jen, you want to talk more about this? Have you guys even talked about the numbers yet? I don't want to get over ourselves.
Sure. Well, in terms of numbers, we are looking at the costs. We talked about level of service at the last meeting. And so we are looking at the costs associated with both maintaining compliance for the MS4 permit for the things that are required from the state and the feds. And then also looking at the TMDL impervious surface expenses for that portion of your stormwater program. And so we're working through costs on that side, at least cost estimates on that side. In terms of looking at what sort of fee rate would be sufficient to address stormwater programming needs, this conversation really helps inform that, because that's going to what that rate looks like is going to differ depending on if we want to do something tiered, if we want to do something, in one of these other structures, what kinds of credits are we wanting to look at? What does the impervious surface landscape look like when we're, looking at all the parcel data that we have? So that will be probably the core of the next conversation, where we talk about not just about a fee system, but all of the other recommendations we have in terms of how the town can approach their stormwater programming costs. But I am anticipating, based on what we hear from you all today and how we narrow down the focus of what the ideal or the most, the most palatable fee system might look like. Once we look at that and we look at that in the context of the costs, I would anticipate that we would be presenting to you a couple of different rate structures, not different in terms of how they're built, but in what sort of actual fee is being charged. And, if you did $25, it would look like this. If you did $50, it would look like this. If you did $100, $100 in Gettysburg, we think honestly is a bit high. I don't think we'd want to go that direction, but we would give you a suite of numbers to look at to see if we go this route, this is what would be raised, and here are the costs that could be covered with that. So I think your question, Pastor John, is a really good one, but I think we're not quite there yet. This conversation tonight really helps inform that decision making.
When you get into the part of the discussion where you talk about what to include and exclude, there's a whole range of expenditures that go in the direction of stormwater. For example, you have a lot of stormwater with your road maintenance, and you have to decide which of those you want to include. So we started with kind of trying to quantify all of the different expenditures that we had. And then as we moved forward, we narrowed it down to ones that we thought would create a kind of a reasonable, acceptable fee, knowing that some of that other stuff would have to continue to be general funded. And at the end of the day, we also did not move forward with the fee, but we spent about a year doing evaluations on it. So I can speak from some experience with having done that.
This is George with the Daughters. I wanted to chime in if I could real quick. Couple of things for context. I think Zach, you can tell me yay or nay, but I think we're looking at 180 to 200,000 square feet of impervious, maybe more on our campus. Probably more like 250,000. I'm thinking about the school too. So with that being said, I'll generally say that, and I always say this because I don't speak for the Daughters, because they certainly speak for themselves. I'm here to represent them. But they also believe in justice, and there are sisters living in there that's a resident, and they also understand that they're a resident of a town, So that being said, I don't think the exemption is an issue with the daughters, not having an exemption where they want to pay the just fair fees associated with their use of that stormwater system. I mean, we recognize it, we know it and understand it. I think the tiered system also then works in well because we are, without a doubt, probably the largest impermeable site in the town, a single site. And we continue to want to and will do measures that help the environment and help stormwater management generally based on our most recent actions. So if there are any sorts of credits for that, that's fine. But I also don't want it to become burdensome for the town just to save us a couple of dollars. So, again, that's my opinion, but it's also based on the ethics and morals of the sisters related to the environment and related to justice among citizens of the town of Emmitsburg.
Thank you, George.
I'm going to say something here real quick. This is Steve Trout. When we're talking about the water and sewer infrastructure improvements we got to have, I think the town, I think when you send out your next water and sewer bills, let them know what's up with the situation we're in with the water and sewer infrastructure, so they have a better understanding of what's hitting the town in this situation, and also let them know about this federally and state mandated MS4 program and where they got you, they got your feet to the fire there. So as elected officials of the community, you're doing all you can to try to satisfy all these problems. And we're going to have to come together as a community, and we're all going to have to chip in, do what we got to do. We're going to have to grab a shovel and do what we have to do. I think people appreciate that.
Steve, it's an excellent point, and that's something I want the University of Maryland for our fourth and final pamphlet that they create for us. Whatever this recommending body recommends, ultimately, I want it to, I want them to create a pamphlet that basically states, look, we're recommending this system. This is why we're recommending it. This is how much we're recommending it. And then I really want to get feedback from them, before we take a vote on it.
Right. But I would definitely, that letter has to come from you guys, has to come from the elected officials, not the state of Maryland representatives, because most of them will throw that in the wastebasket.
Right.
It needs to come from people we know.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that means a lot more.
Yeah, and I think, is it typical to have a 30, 60 day comment period before implementing, or how does it work with the state law? Or, we obviously want to do a little more since we're a small town.
Yeah, it's not necessary. I'm sorry, Michelle, were you going to say something? Okay, sorry, I heard another voice there. I wasn't sure if I was cutting somebody off. There's not a state requirement that I am aware of. But I think towns typically will bring it up at a council meeting and then allow it. I think it becomes de facto 30 days because they will allow public comment until the next council meeting. Like they will hear it, debate it, and then get public comment and then vote at a future council meeting. So it could be, a month, 2 months, whatever you think makes the most sense for the town. I also think the point that was raised earlier about being able to speak to water, sewer, and stormwater in one conversation with the community makes a lot of sense. So that might be something to consider in the timeline as well, to not be, for them to get comfortable with either the stormwater or the water and sewer, and then to come back around with the other, could be a little fatiguing for the community.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Either in March or April, whatever works better for University of Maryland, we want to do a full presentation of whatever this body recommends to the Board of Commissioners and Mayor.
Yeah, and make sure that we're advertising, although I agree with the sentiment that's been repeated tonight, that until it shows up in your water bill, sometimes it doesn't really resonate with anybody. But making sure that there's a real big push for public input or at least public to be at that meeting when it's first introduced and to be able to absorb and digest some of it before they have the chance to comment, I think is really important. And I love the idea. I love Mr. Trout's idea of doing a bill stuffer in advance of any sort of vote to, put it on everyone's radar and say, here's what's coming in, here's why, and here's why we think this is the best path forward. And our team's certainly happy to help work something like that up for you all, but I do agree it needs to be coming from this committee or the commissioners or the town itself, because what you all have to say resonates a lot more with the community than what big old dumb University of Maryland has to say.
Mhm.
Well, I guess I'm about the only one that hasn't said anything. So
Go ahead, Frank.
I guess I'm about the only one that hasn't said anything.
Well, I
I
thought
haven't-
vacation, Frank.
I fell asleep there for a little bit. It's been a tough week. Uh, what is the county looking at doing? Didn't I hear earlier before the meeting really started, that the county has a new group of people working on this? So with that, I'm sure there's going to be a county fee. And does that mean that our town people are going to get nailed twice
No,
for the same rain?
no, the county's not working on a fee. We looked at it. We did a lot of evaluation on it. We decided not to move forward with it. So the county's going to continue to fund its stormwater program the same way it did before. The only thing it did on the 18th was add 3 positions to the stormwater management function, so that there could be a department head and an environmental inspector and an administrative person.
And Shannon, let me further, let me know if I'm right. If the county would ever determine to implement a stormwater utility fee, it would not be implemented on the municipalities that are MS4 communities, because we have our own MS4 requirements. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. And especially if it implemented it through the stormwater remediation fee legislation that the state passed, because it wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Sure.
And even if it used a different authorizing mechanism like the resilience authority that I mentioned, I still don't think it would do that.
Something that keeps coming up, I keep hearing it, and it's never been discussed at the council meetings, is that we're talking about raising water rates and lowering sewer rates. Well, I'm not in favor of that, because our infrastructural sewer is just about as bad as our water infrastructure. So obviously we don't have enough money in that fund either to take care of our problems. So why would we want to lower our rate? And I'm still not sure why we lowered our tax rate, other than I think we might have got some bad information on that. But it's sure like we don't have, we don't have all this money that somebody thought we had, that said we had to lower our tax rate. I know I'm gonna be outvoted, and I've changed my stance on this a little bit, and I can buy into some of it, but I can tell you what, I'm not gonna vote to put all this burden on our taxpayers. I'm gonna put some of the burden on our staff, and to have to tighten our belts, and the days of getting everything that we want and all the new equipment and all that stuff, that's gonna have to come to an end, because we're not gonna put this whole burden on our taxpayers. And it's hard to put to make these people pay for something when they say, sorry about that. When you don't have, they say, what am I getting for this? And just like Mr. Trout talked at our first meeting, it's hard to show somebody what they're getting for this fee. You say, well, you're making the bay cleaner. Prove it to me. Well, we really can't. I don't know if I'm making any sense with that, but that's where I'm going.
Yeah, taking a lot of.
And I want to do our part. I understand that, but I don't think our taxpayers are going to be the ones to foot this whole bill. And
Might
that's
be a
all I
better
got to say
sell.
tonight.
So there might be a better sell to talk about it in terms of maintaining your stormwater infrastructure as a utility, similar to how you're maintaining your water and sewer infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Shannon. And Frank, that's one thing that we're going to have to do in the near future. I was talking with Jen and everybody at the University of Maryland. We don't have an inventory of all of our stormwater management infrastructure, such as our pipes and everything else, and that has a rating system, A to F. So we could be sitting on the same kind of problem with our stormwater management infrastructure right now as we are with our sewer and our water infrastructure. Our stormwater infrastructure is old. It's not as old as our sewer and water, but it's still extremely old. How old Northgate is, and Silo Hill and everything else. That's getting pretty aged. And anytime something collapses, there's going to be $50,000 to $100,000 to fix it. So luckily, we've been really lucky on that sense that hasn't happened, but it's just a matter of time. So that's a really good point, Shannon.
One of the things you might be able to do is get the records from the environmental inspectors on the public or the private stormwater inspections, because they have to inspect them every 3 years, and they do that for Emmitsburg, right?
Yeah, we do have the triennial inspections. I'm just meaning the infrastructure, such as the pipes and everything under the roads and.
Yeah.
the things
Some of that stuff is going to come through the inspection, like if they've got corrugated metal risers that are corroding and stuff like that, you're going to be able to see where some of your failures are happening. So that'll help you to kind of get started on some of that.
Sure, absolutely. So I think we have a good, starting point for our team. I think everyone kind of agrees. If the board would recommend a fee, I think we all kind of agree what it would look like at this point. Not amounts, but the tiered system, the ERU. So.
Yeah, so I want to be, I want to recognize the time. I don't want to keep people too long, but we want to hear what you have to say. But so it sounds like the general consensus is a tiered system is what is most palatable to people, with no exemptions, except perhaps looking into the hardship exemption as an option. And Zach, we can find some examples of places that have done that. And if you do credits only toward the non-residential side of things, at least initially, billed quarterly as part of the water and sewer bill. And so we'll use that as along with all the rest of your comments from this evening to really focus in on what our recommendations and preliminary numbers look like for the next meeting. So that'll be the meat of the next meeting. We will also develop the 2-pager like we've been doing for this meeting, so you have that to distribute and get to the folks that weren't here this evening. Does that sound correct to everyone? Zach, is that what?
That sounds perfect. Yep. And please, if you can attend, please attend our next meeting. It's going to be vital. I am going to be asking for a vote just so we can have some kind of recommendation to our commissioners and mayor.
I just have one more question. Maybe this is a dumb one. What kind of a dollar figure are we looking at that are we spending on this whole thing? What will we be needing for a year to take care of all of our requirements?
That's a great question, and that's a number that we're still working on for y'all.
Okay, great.
Yep, that we're working on for y'all. And then one of the things that we'll need to decide is, we'll have a good estimate for the full program. And one of the things that we'll need to decide as a group is, do we want to be how much of that cost do we want to be covering with a potential fee system?
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So then I would also just say, if anybody comes up with thoughts or questions after we wrap up here this evening, please send them to Zach and he can let us know. If you're sitting around tomorrow and you come up with a brilliant idea or a question, we'd love to have it. So just forward any of that stuff to Zach and he can get it in our hands.
I do have one question. What is everyone's recommendation? And I know we're running out of time here, on exempting town properties, especially if we are not going to be funding this program 100% from a fee. So, does that make a lot of sense for the town to pay a stormwater fee, especially if we're using money out of our general fund?
Generally, you don't assess yourself, and it's not because it's fair or unfair. It's because the money is going to you anyway.
That's what I was thinking too. I
Might
don't,
look good, but the rest of the people in town say, hey, look, we're all chipping in.
But
It's
to
really
pay
just
yourself
one.
doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's one pocket to the other, that's all.
Right.
Yeah,
so I would think, the only exemption would really be town-owned properties.
Yeah.
That's one thing we didn't talk about, so I thought it'd be important just to mention. So
That
Jen or
makes sense. Zach.
how does Frank feel about that?
You woke me back up, Steve.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we're already, it's like you say, we're gonna take it from one pot and put it in the other pot.
Yeah.
That
that's
doesn't make
all.
any sense.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you all for being so engaged. We appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a great
Thanks,
meeting.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Bye.